Hi there, welcome to our food safety webinar. My name is John Vedenberg. I'm a registered dietitian with the UF Health Jacksonville Employee Wellness Program, and today's webinar is really going to focus on some frequently asked questions about food safety. I think now more than ever, we are finding ourselves in our kitchens and maybe wondering what on earth we should be doing, and we definitely want to make sure that when we're preparing our own food, we're keeping that food safe for our family. And when we look at what's going on nationwide and worldwide during a pandemic, simply put, we don't want to find ourselves in the emergency room for something that can be easily prevented. So it's important to understand some basic fundamentals about food safety, but also understand them in terms of what practical steps you can take, and realize that overall the United States has a very safe food supply. But despite all the safety around our food, we still get sick. I mean, I think anyone listening to this has probably at one point in their life had some form of foodborne illness. The chart you see on your screen outlines potential causes or single source foods that have led to outbreaks over the years. And most of those are going to be in the meat, fish, and poultry side of the basket. So we look at fish, dairy, chicken, beef, shellfish, as well as pork, accounting for more than half of the foodborne illness outbreaks. And that's because the bacteria that really thrive in these environments, they like moisture, they like protein, and they like a low acid content. So that's why each of those foods can be potentially problematic, and we want to take extra steps to make sure we keep our families safe. So know what you're up against when we look at causes of foodborne illness, but now more than ever, we want to be vigilant in terms of our food safety, especially if we're trying to kind of relearn our way around the kitchen, understanding what different things do. We don't want you in the ER just because you don't know how chicken works. So we're going to keep you out of there, hopefully, after today's webinar. Now, what we're going to do is look at a series of questions. These are things that I get over the recent days and weeks and months about some questions people often have about keeping their food safe and keep their food safe. And one of the most frequently asked questions is, other than hand washing, which we obviously are well aware of, has many applications for overall health and well-being, but what else can we do to keep our food safe? And I would say, outside of hand washing, I think I would pay very close attention to the temperature that we're keeping our food. And what I mean by temperature is, ideally we want to try to keep our cold food cold and our hot food hot. More foodborne illness occurs because food that's supposed to be maintained at 40 degrees or below is left out for too long. Think of those deli meat trays that are left out for 2, 3, 4 hours. Those are the types of issues where we can see a lot of potential for foodborne illness. Now, there's several resources at a website called foodsafety.gov, and I'll share that later as well. But you'll find several handouts and informational flyers about some basic food safety steps, but it's pretty much summarized in this diagram. So in addition to keeping our hands clean, we want to keep all food service contact areas clean. We want to try to keep our raw meat and poultry, or chicken and turkey, away from our ready-to-eat items. We want to avoid cross-contamination. We want to make sure that we're not only storing foods at safe temperatures in the refrigerator, but also cooking them to the proper internal temperature. I'm actually going to be sharing with you a little graphic later on about what are the recommended temperatures to cook things like beef, pork, fish, as well as chicken. And then I think another thing to be very careful with, especially if we find ourselves doing a lot of batch cooking at home and cooking stews and casseroles or large containers of chili, is we want to get those leftovers to the fridge within 2 hours after being cooked. And we really want to make sure it's being cooled rapidly. So not taking the whole stock pot and place it in the fridge. That's not going to get down to a safe temperature quick enough. So making sure we're transferring some of those leftovers to more shallow containers. Because essentially, we're trying to keep food out of this area called the danger zone. So in between the temperatures of 40 to 140 degrees, bacteria really thrive and really multiply. And this is where they really like to hang out. I used to call that danger zone the Disney World for bacteria. But since Disney World's closed, we'll just call it the Publix when it first opens in the morning area for bacteria. So that's where they really start to thrive and really multiply. So again, those are some additional steps to consider when we talk about keeping our food safe. Next question, can coronaviruses be transmitted through food? Now, what we know currently is that it cannot be transmitted through food, or it's unlikely to be transmitted through food. And what that means is that right now, the coronavirus appears to be transmitted via respiratory outlets, meaning if somebody were to cough or sneeze on a surface and you were to touch that surface and touch your face, that's typically how we're seeing it transmitted through respiratory droplets, but not transmitted through the food supply. So if somebody infected with the coronavirus were to prepare your food, you don't have any issues with potential transmittal unless, of course, that person is coughing or sneezing on that food and you touch that food and you touch their face. So again, there are a lot of steps that would have to happen for that to occur. So right now, the short answer to this question is no, it cannot be transmitted through the food nor our water supply. How long can you safely keep leftovers in the fridge? So again, just like you guys, I'm cooking a lot more food at home and sometimes I make a little bit more than our family can eat. So we want to put the leftovers in the fridge for some other day. The problem is you might forget it after not too long. So the guideline here is anywhere from 3 to 4 days is about the safe range of time to keep those leftovers in the fridge, provided that they're kept cool the entire time, meaning at 40 degrees or below. But after about 4 days, you don't want to risk it. Just toss it out. So even if it doesn't have any appearance or rancid smell, don't want to take a chance with some of those leftovers. Again, it's all about precautions and to keep your family safe. So in terms of temperature settings, when we look at it for your refrigerator and freezer, what's the best setting? So again, one of the best steps to keep our food safe is proper temperature control. So 40 degrees or below Fahrenheit for the refrigerator and 0 degrees or below for the freezer. Now, every refrigerator / freezer is different in terms of what the settings translate to. If you have one that tells you the specific degrees, that's great. But regardless of the type you have, I would suggest investing in an appliance thermometer. You can get them for maybe $5 at Target or Walmart, and you can use that to double check what the temperatures are in your refrigerator and your freezer, especially the refrigerator. As I said before, you don't want to have your refrigerator not doing the proper job to keep all those perishable foods at or below 40 degrees. How long can I keep meat in the freezer? And what about other frozen foods? So when we look at it from a food safety perspective, you can keep meat and other foods in your freezer for as long as you want, indefinitely. You know, I might go out on a limb and say almost forever. However, what we notice is that the longer it's stored in the freezer, the food quality will start to deteriorate, usually within 3 to 4 months for meat and maybe 6 months or less for other frozen foods. Now, again, it all depends on how it was handled prior to being frozen, if the packaging is still intact. There's a lot of other variables. So all that will dictate how well the quality of that food is maintained. But in terms of food safety, you can keep it in there forever. You don't have to worry about having chicken that's been in the freezer for a year if it's going to harm your family, provided it's properly cooked afterwards. So again, don't forget about the food that's in there because we still want food to taste good. But as far as safety, you can keep it in there indefinitely. Should I freeze bread? What is the best way to thaw it? So maybe some of you have hoarded some bread. I don't know. But yes, you can freeze bread if you find that it might go to waste or it might go stale before it's used. I would suggest double wrapping it. Again, that's going to help maintain the quality of that bread. So placing that bread in one of those special freezer Ziploc bags and then trying to remove as much air as possible from it, and then wrapping it in perhaps some aluminum foil is really a good way to seal the bread completely. And when it comes time to thaw it, I would suggest throwing it right in the oven, right in the toaster oven, whichever area is going to work best for you, because that'll help that bread kind of retain some of its moisture and spring back a little bit, so it still has some pretty intact flavor. And every it all depends on the size of the loaf of the bread, the density of the type of bread being used, but I would think for about 3 to 5 minutes at a temperature setting of at least 300, maybe 350 degrees is more than adequate to really thaw any bread that's frozen. And if you want to take frozen sliced bread, and you can just prepare that for, probably the best application for that is to make toast. So take that right from the freezer and place it in your toaster oven. You maybe have to add another minute or two to the setting, but that's still going to be the best way to thaw to maintain overall flavor integrity. Next question, do I need to wash fruit with a rind before eating it? So things like watermelon and cantaloupe and honeydew. The idea here is that we're not eating the rind, so does it really matter if we wash it? And I have to tell you, yes, you do need to wash those fruits before eating it. Bacteria from the soil and where it's maintained can get on the skin of that rind, and as you cut the rind, it can be transferred to the inside of that fruit. So please make sure you're washing all of those fruits and vegetables before eating it, even if you aren't going to be eating the exterior part of it, especially when we're talking about cutting it. Now, whether or not that'll apply to something like a banana, I wouldn't think so, because you're not actually going to be cutting into it. Now, if you're going to be slicing the banana through the peel, then yes, you definitely want to make sure you're washing the rind beforehand. And just plain old cold running water is all you need to do. You don't have to invest in any of the fancy fruit vegetable washes. And by all means, don't use any type of soap or bleach, because that's just going to likely get into that particular fruit and potentially make you sick. So just a nice cold running water. Speaking of running water, should I wash raw chicken or other meats before cooking that? Now, a lot of people do this to be, extra vigilant with food safety, but this is actually counterproductive. You should not wash raw chicken or other meats before cooking, because you're just going to increase the likelihood of bacteria from that chicken splashing onto your countertops and other areas and getting you sick. You don't need to wash these meats before you cook them. Cooking it is going to destroy any disease-causing organisms, so don't wash it beforehand. It's going to be only increasing your risk for foodborne illness. Should I use a separate cutting board for raw meats? I think that's a good idea. I'd say yes. When we look at ways to keep our food safe, we talked about the risk of cross-contamination from handling raw chicken and going to cut a garden salad. You run the risk of cross-contamination there, but if you can use separate cutting boards, you can minimize that risk even further. The type of cutting board you want to use, that's really up to you. Whether it's plastic, whether it's wood, they each have their advantages and disadvantages, but no matter what type of cutting board that you're using, you want to make sure you're using warm soapy water to keep it clean. And again, having a separate cutting board for raw meats just as an extra step of security to help keep that food safe. It isn't absolutely vital to have separate cutting boards, but if you don't, you definitely want to make sure you're getting that cutting board squeaky clean in between uses. And the dishwasher, I think, is probably the best way to keep those cutting boards clean, but again, that would rule out some of the potential wood cutting boards. If a food still smells okay, is it safe to eat? So our nose is a pretty good indicator on whether or not food is spoiled, but not always the best indicator. So I would say maybe. So not yes, not no, but maybe. So again, if you're looking at leftovers in the fridge that have been in there 5 or 6 days, still smells okay, why chance it? Don't take any chances. So even if it still smells okay, if it's been outside of that window for leftovers, I would toss it. So don't always use the nose as the prime indicator. It's just not worth it. Again, we're trying to keep everyone healthy and everyone safe, and it's all about minimizing the risk of foodborne illness. Are there any foods you can't freeze? So again, we talked about before, we can freeze foods indefinitely, pretty much stay in there forever. From a food safety standpoint, it's the quality that starts to deteriorate the longer it's in there. However, certain foods like eggs you can't freeze. And certain foods like tuna salad and egg salad, any of those mayonnaise-based salads, those don't lend up to freezing very well either. So those are probably the two ones that come to mind. If you freeze milk, it does expand, so you have to be mindful of the type of container that you're using. You don't want to put a full milk jug in there and have it burst on you after it expands through the freezing process. But really just eggs and mayonnaise-based salads are the ones I would recommend not freezing. The next question deals with packaging issues. You know, when we look at things like chicken stock or almond milk, we'll buy them sometimes in the non-refrigerated part of the supermarket, but after you open it, it said it needs to be refrigerated and used within anywhere from 5 to 10 days after opening, depending on what the label says. If you go beyond that date, again, you're taking chances, but you're taking more chances if you go beyond that date for chicken stock. Almond milk, you can usually tell if it's starting to turn. You'll smell a little spoilage, it might clump up. That's when you'll start to notice it's gone bad. So again, you can open that almond milk, leave it in the fridge after 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. It still smells okay and it pours fine and no discoloration. I'd say continue to use it. However, I wouldn't really take my chances with chicken stock because of the potential for foodborne illness. Again, when we're looking at anything sourced from poultry, it's going to be a potentially higher risk food item in terms of food poisoning. Is it safe to thaw and refreeze meats? Yes. So let's say you're having a big old cookout and took all these steaks out of the freezer and thawed them out, and all of a sudden, boom, pandemic, everybody stay home. Oh gosh, now got all this meat left out. Well, you can refreeze it. It's perfectly safe in which to do so. However, again, all goes back to the quality issues. Whenever we're thawing a meat and refreezing it, we're adjusting the moisture content. So you might notice a slight drop in quality depending on what you're thawing and refreezing. But from a food safety standpoint, again, to minimize food waste, perfectly fine to thaw and refreeze meats if you need to. How do I know if the meat I prepare is actually done? Now, can't use our eyes. This is the one part where you have to be very close attention, because I showed you that very first graphic, more than half of our foodborne illness comes from meat. And typically it's because the meat was undercooked. The only way to know if the meat you prepare is actually done is to use a food probe thermometer. You can get those for $10 or less at any area supermarket. You can find them also at Target and Walmart. And pretty much anywhere you're finding your groceries, you're going to find a probe thermometer. So that is the only way to know if the meat you prepare is actually done. And on that website I mentioned from the outset, foodsafety.gov, they've got a lot of resources that talk about what those temperatures might be. So for things such as leftovers, casseroles, and chicken, that temperature when it's done is 165 degrees. For things like beef, pork, lamb, roast, steaks, chops, that's 145 degrees. So those are the temperature settings that tell you whether or not that meat is done. A lot of times you can use your eyes as the first indicator, say, oh, it looks like it might be done, but using that thermometer is the only way to know for sure. And again, when we look at things like beef and pork and lamb and roast, we want to let them rest for at least 3 minutes before checking the temperature. So taking that out of the oven or off the grill or however it's being prepared, letting it to rest allows those connective fibers that were heated up and swell out some of the juice to relax and reabsorb some of that juice. So when you cut it, it's not going all over your countertops or your cutting board. So that rest part for those roasts is very, very important from a quality standpoint and from a potential for cross-contamination down the road. So again, those are some of the more common foodborne illness questions and food safety issues that I get from time to time. One of the things that we're working on down the road is some quarantine cuisine. So these are going to be some cooking tips to kind of help you move through some of the supplies that you might have in your kitchen and wondering what are some creative ways to use some of the frozen food in your freezer or some of the canned goods
you might have stocked up. So we want to, again, give you some practical tips to kind of get you through this part of something that we're all dealing with, something that's unprecedented. But again, we want to help sure that we're keeping you and your family safe. And that's our main concern. So for this particular activity, it's worth 10 points towards your wellness credit. Just send your name and badge number to our email address right there. As many of you know, we do have a new office. We've been over in the new office since December, right next to the south parking garage on Jefferson Street. But what we have brand new now is we actually have a sign. So it actually says Wellness Center. So we no longer have to say it's the former Cancer Center building. You actually see Wellness Center right out there. So we're gonna have classes every day via Zoom. So tune in, come to the webpage at Wellness TV to watch a recorded session, or tune in live. We send out information and invites weekly to our wellness distribution list. And again, we want to try to make sure we have something for everyone. And most of all, stay safe out there. Take care.